Coming up with 2 Summer League games in the books, we break down the performances of first-round pick Noah Clowney, surprising Jalen Wilson, and also take a look at a couple other names like Kennedy Chandler, Armoni Brooks, all the guys you knew would step up in a big way, right down to whether or not David Duke Jr. is doing enough to stick around with the Brooklyn Nets. We dive in coming up next.
You are Locked On Nets, your daily Brooklyn Nets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Brooklyn, yo. Yes, my friends. It is a Locked On Nets podcast right here on the Locked On Podcast Network. It's your team, the Brooklyn Nets, every single day. Over there, you're going to find Doug Norrie. He's the owner-operator of DFSR. For all your daily fantasy sports rankings from DraftKings to FanDuel, he's got you covered. I'm Adam Armbrich breaking down your New Jersey Devils on the Devils Puck Luck podcast with Danny McDonough. We thank you for making us your first listen of the day. We are free on all those great platforms. And Doug, Vegas, baby, Summer League, the kind of performances that will define careers for generations to come. Jalen Wilson, Noah Clowney, all the guys we're going to break down here. But how have you been enjoying the first couple of games from Vegas?
Yeah, look, Summer League in general is fun. Like, this is a pretty high-profile one with Wembanyama. Like, the other guys, Miller, I know Scoot twisted the ankle, so he's going to be out. But, like, in general, this has been as high-profile a Summer League as you get. The Nets games don't live up to the same sort of, like, buzz, but that's all right because as far as I'm concerned, it's just fun to have Nets basketball. I'll start dreaming on some of the guys that we're seeing here and thinking about who might be in a Nets uniform longer than just the time in Vegas. And I mean, we're going to start off with them, but it's clearly they have something here with Jalen Wilson, who has really, really impressed.
Yeah, and that's, it's funny. Obviously, Jariq Whitehead with the injury, he's not going to be down there in the Summer League. He may not be ready for the beginning of the season. We'll have to wait and see on his timeline recovering from that. And then the other first-round pick, Noah Clowney, we'll discuss, obviously, in the second segment, a young player and one that has a longer road to being a contributor for the Brooklyn Nets. Jalen Wilson, we said at the time when he was drafted in the second round, a couple weeks ago now for the Brooklyn Nets, hey, this is a kid who is on the older side. Now, the hope there is that you're taking a chance on someone that you would like to be closer to NBA ready to contribute, because otherwise you're only 1 or 2 seasons away from saying this 24, soon to be 25-year-old is aging out of our program pretty quickly. Thankfully, he's lived up to it. Game number 1 for him, a little shaky to start, as I think everybody that was on the court had some nerves and just first time getting into basketball, right? And as it went on over these last 2 games, I think we've seen all of the elements that he showed in his final collegiate season, where he's able to get downhill at the basket. He's able to do some nice things defensively. Perimeter shot is there. What is your sense of him before with every one of these players? We're going to talk about what we liked over these couple of games and then where we think they are in the hierarchy of the Brooklyn Nets organization.
Yeah, so with Wilson, the hope here was that he was going to be sort of like NBA ready, knowing that when you get a guy when you take a guy like lower in the second round like this, you're hoping that either it's NBA ready without tons of upside, or you're just like going strictly shooting upside because maybe they fell in the draft for like a variety of reasons. Wilson falls into the former category where you're like, okay, player of the year for Kansas. Is he going to be NBA ready? I think that like the athleticism does not pop off the page, but the IQ does. He made a ton of really, really nice plays in here that, like, in this game specifically against the Knicks, he did it to some degree against the Cavs also, that showed you that the IQ is there. And he's also able to make up for lack of athleticism with body control, with smarts around the basket. I mean, we can go into a couple of these things. I know the points are going to stick out to people for sure, because he drops 18 against the Knicks, 5 of 10 for shooting, 3 from 4 from beyond the arc. That's nice. Got to the line 6 times. But I have to tell you, the thing that I thought was like sort of the most impressive about him was that there were a couple times where he got into the lane where he was able to make interior reads out to open shooters, which I'll tell you, if you're watching a Summer League, that's like not the default setting for these guys usually, right? Like the default setting is, hey, I'm close to the basket. It's go time. And I get it. Why? Like you're there to make baskets and you want to impress. That Wilson was able to make the right reads. And like he should have had more assists too, because there was a Clowney shot that went in that ended up not counting because there was an offensive foul. And there was a couple other open shooters that they just didn't make their shots. That is a really good sign for a guy who's definitely not going to be jumping out of the gym or anything like that.
Mm-hmm.
But from an IQ level, at least, I wouldn't be shocked to see him pretty early in the season here for the Nets, and definitely by the late like end of the season, because I just think he just has the size, strength, and sort of IQ to get there.
Yeah, it's funny too. You bring up a really good point. I think you see it on individual players, not across the entire board here for the Nets in the summer league, but even in game number 1, when the Nets weren't hitting a single shot against the Cavs, it was noted on the broadcast covering summer league, and I did realize it as you watch a little more intently. Like the function of the offense specifically, it was predicated on ball movement and trying to find the open shooters and make the right passes. Usually, and we're actually going to talk about some samples of this in the second segment, it does come down to kind of individual performances in summer league, and especially offensive ones, because that's what you're trying to do. Show that you can go do this thing for an NBA level team, whether it's, by the way, for the Nets organization or anybody else that's watching. Because what's also happening there is every team is scouting everybody else's players and seeing how things shake out. So I think, well, I don't think, I know, like, I agree with you on the two-way contract. By the way, about 5 days ago, Nets gave Jalen Wilson that two-way contract. It's one of 2 that they've given out so far. We'll speculate on the third one here later in the show as well. The other reason I think that he gets a chance with the Nets is based on his size, his skill set, his position, and the fact that the Nets need players. He fills into an area skill set and size wise that the Nets just absolutely need. And when you look at their depth chart right now, it's kind of really easy to see how he can get into that role potentially.
Yeah, and at 6'8", 225, he's going to be able to hold up against like modern day fours.
Yep.
Not probably doesn't have it in him to play small ball 5, I don't think. But maybe, but probably not. But in general, though, again, what you're hoping for is sort of like at that age, in that age range or that age bracket that he's coming in at, is like you have to be kind of just ready here. And what's good for him too is, like, unlike, let's say, Clowney, who we're going to talk about too, like the body is NBA ready too, right? So sometimes with the younger guys, with just 4 years of being able to fill out, 4 more years of the weight room, 4 more years of just like sort of strict diet and stuff like that, that you are going to get at the collegiate level, and being able to turn the corner in his senior season, which he clearly did from just like a scoring and development standpoint. You are like, this is the hope, right? It's like, and basically all you're hoping in summer league is to have it look just under control and pretty cerebral, and have the rest of the, like, the physical stuff be able to hold up on the NBA level with these other guys. Like, he was able to get on the boards plenty, right? So these other things that I think we could have been pretty confident that was going to be there, just because, again, when you're this age coming out of college, I think you are kind of a known quantity at that point.
Yeah.
But there still just has to be enough to get you over that last little hump, right? Because summer league is not the NBA. And at that point in the summer league, you kind of do have to show out a little bit, because you just have to stand out, right? Like there's just like, if you don't stand out summer league, it's going to be really tough in this age bracket to make it. And like, I think for Wilson's standpoint, great news, Nets fans, like he checked every box that you would hope to see for a summer league, where, again, it can also be sometimes hard for kind of wing types who aren't great on ball creators to get theirs, because it's going to be like much more guard heavy and much more on ball stuff. And he was still able to. So I think it's just really, really positive performance overall.
Yeah, and the last note that I have on him is, again, when you think about it from a prospect standpoint, we usually talk about second round picks as being just kind of dart throws. But the difference between, because I had mentioned this last week over on Twitter about how, hey, if he had been a year younger, he would have been a first round pick. And somebody asked the question, well, why not the year prior? He could have come out and someone could have taken him. When you go back and compare his stat lines in college, the year prior at Kansas, 21-22, he's only hitting at that point 26% from deep. He's only giving you 11 points per game. It's not until that next year, 34 from beyond the arc, 20-point scorer, right? So you needed that sample size to prove that you could be that player at the next level. And you can make the case solely based on age is what makes him available in the second round for the Nets. And because of where the Nets are currently, I actually think he fits the timeline to say, hey, you can contribute a bit for us now in the short term, and we'll see if you have any long-term value for us as we rotate things over the next couple of seasons. Coming up here in a second, obviously, the first round pick, Noah Clowney, the youngest player in the draft. Did he show us enough to understand why Brooklyn took him at 21?
All right, before we get to that, I'll tell you about our friends over at Ibotta. If you're picking up burgers or hot dogs for the summer barbecue, you know you're already doing it. So why not get cash back for it with Ibotta? Ibotta gives you cash back on hundreds of grocery items, from produce to personal care to pantry goods. So you can make sure you're beating inflation no matter what you're purchasing. Either link your loyalty account or upload your receipt after you shop. You're going to get cash back. It's that easy. The average Ibotta user earns $120 per year. You can cover the cost of an entire shopping trip. You can just use the cash back to buy the flight you've been eyeing, the game you've been dying to go to, maybe the fancy dinner that you've been promising yourself. Right now, Ibotta is offering our listeners $5 just for trying Ibotta by using the code LOCKED when you register. Just go to the App Store or Google Play Store and download the free Ibotta app. Use the code LOCKED. That's Ibotta, Ibotta, in the Google Play or App Store, and use the code LOCKED. Download Ibotta today.
Okay, so the other and arguably more high-profile player for the Brooklyn Nets, obviously in Summer League, is Noah Clowney, taken 21st overall by the Brooklyn Nets. And obviously, at the time you and I talked about him, we speculated about how high was he on other teams' boards relative to where they are and what they're looking to accomplish. The Nets are afforded the ability of time, and that's why you take a player like this. In these first two games, I think you understand why Noah Clowney needs time. That's not a negative. He did a lot of things that you can like. Blocked multiple shots in the second game against the Knicks there. Shows good defensive versatility, switching out, closing out on players, rebounding. He looks like he has a high energy kind of motor to him. And then also, everything about the offensive game is kind of a wait and see. And there's still nice things in there too, by the way. Like, he makes the right passes. He does a good job trying to get out there on the perimeter and set some screens. But he just feels like a guy, hey, don't get yourself over your skis on him being a part of something in the short term. The Nets took him knowing this is a multiple year project before he's molded into the ultimate player they think he can be for them.
Yeah, look, we knew coming out of the draft that he was a raw prospect. That was sort of why we were happy with the pick to some degree. I mean, Clowney wasn't super high on either of our boards, I don't think, for the Nets, but we both understood the pick in the end. Like, this kind of young, hopefully floor spacing, switching big. Like, that was the dream of Clowney. That is what the kind of guy he's going to be on the court, like in his probably best version of himself. It's going to take time. And the summer league just showed that this is going to take time. I mean, if it comes at all, but I think it probably will. One thing I liked in the first game, at least, was that he did come out firing. He did put up 7 threes in that game. I like that kind of confidence. It didn't come as much in the second game, mostly because Armoni Brooks was like just sort of flamethrowing, and Jalen Wilson was just getting to the rim. So I don't know if the opportunities were more. Again, he did make another 3, and there was an offensive foul. So it's like one of these things where sometimes just one little thing, right? being 2 for 3 from 3 in that game, all of a sudden maybe we're talking a little different. And he did make that shot. In general, the offensive game has a long way to go, for sure. Like, just around the basket stuff did not look all that coordinated. You're hoping, I believe the shot will be there. I feel pretty confident about that. And from a team that still is going to want to switch everything on defense, he's going to be able to do that, even if all of the decisions in these first couple games weren't necessarily correct. And that's just okay, right? So I think, like, athleticism-wise, you saw it. I think confidence-wise, you're probably not feeling too bad about it. Offensive-wise, there's not a ton to hold on to here. And for a guy like this in this archetype, it's just going to be tough to really get off awesomely in summer league when we knew that this wasn't that we knew this was already kind of far away, right? Because like even the college stuff didn't really pop on offense either. So I don't know. I'm in no way discouraged by the first 2 games. I mean, what do you feel? Do you feel that way? Like, are you discouraged at all? I feel like this is kind of what I expected, honestly.
Yeah, no. Yes, exactly. Like, if you had the right expectations coming into it, then you wouldn't be disappointed about these performances. Someone had asked, I think over on YouTube, where they said, oh, and he ended up getting more run in that first game. Like, I haven't seen a lot of them. And we've talked about before in summer league, like, it's hard to be a big or, a 4-5 kind of player and really be able to put together a complete game, because it's not what's usually going on. It ends up being very individualized, especially if you get into the second, third, and fourth quarters. This is when the offensive guys start to say, hey, watch me take this over and put on a bit of a display. So I think that's going to hold him back as well. But all the little seeds are there. I think the bigger question maybe for me is, and it's not to overanalyze 2 games of Noah Clowney. It's more the philosophical question of, okay, he's a really young player coming out of the draft. you have to look at him if you're the Brooklyn Nets and think in 2 years, when he's still just 21 years old, we look at him as having significant upside for us because he doesn't represent any real short-term value. And I do look around the first round picks and other names that could have gone to Brooklyn, even specifically with larger players, and just say, boy, if you want to dream on someone that could get on the court in their first year, you want somebody that has some defensive versatility, which Clowney does, but then already has that perimeter, that little bit of shooting game on the offensive end, because then you can think about sticking them out there with Nicholas Claxton for certain stretches. These two players will never be able to play together. And oh, by the way, they're not the same mold, but I look at Noah Clowney and then I look at Nicholas Claxton and I remind myself, Nicholas Claxton has taken a long time to develop into the player he is today. And he's still incredibly young, right? Like he'd be one of the younger players on the Nets roster in the summer league right now. So that's the way you have to look at Noah Clowney and just see if he can continue to get there. It's going to be, I think, for me, not frustrating in a bad way, but it's going to be frustrating to not get that sample size outside of probably the G League for quite a while.
Well, and see, here's the thing too, because like, right, so the idea of drafting these younger guys, right? So because what you can't teach is 6'10" was a 7'2" wingspan and insane motor, right? And like, so that's why you take the shot on these guys, because in the end, there's a brand of guy that just also isn't going to last forever on draft boards either, because you can't teach that. Like you can't, you can help mold it, and you can help, have a good player development system to make sure they realize the full potential, but you can't just go and make a guy that's 6'5" be 6'10", right? And so when those guys are bigger, well, right. But I'm saying, like, this is why you take upside shots on these guys that are young and hope that you ultimately get there, because you're hoping that at some point it all does come around. Because here's the thing. They won't be there. They won't be there later in the draft, and they're not going to be there next year because they're going to go now, because teams are going to take risks on these guys. These guys do not always make it, right? Like we've seen this many times. This type of guy doesn't always get there, but you do have to take shots on them for every once in a while, or maybe a lot, because when they do get there, you really have something that is going to be hard to just replicate on the open market, let's say, right? Yep. And I do kind of have faith that Clowney will be something here. I'm not drawing on it from summer league stuff here. Go ahead.
Yeah. No. You know what's funny about it? Because I will say, 2 years from now, when the draft is happening and you're looking at prospects, that will come right back to and say, now remember, Noah Clowney is younger than 50%, 60% of the guys that we're talking about in the first round here, right? And here's where his game has grown. The other hard part right now is Noah Clowney is being drafted by the Brooklyn Nets to fit into potentially a very different roster in a couple of years, right? We don't know where the Nets are going to be 2 years from now. And that's the other hard part about it too. Not that he's going to fit into any version of a roster in this moment, but Spencer Dinwiddie, may or may not be here, right? What's going to happen? Dorian Finney-Smith will not be here by then. Royce O'Neal will not be here by then, right? So the pieces and what the Nets envision Noah Clowney fitting into is also something that you're projecting 2 and 3 years down the road.
Right. And so, because if he does pop, then again, if he pops, you can fit him into any system, no matter who your guy is.
Right.
Right. Like whoever your other guys are, this kind of guy with this size, with this length, with the defensive acumen, with his ability to switch. And if he can, and if he have the shooting come around, literally every single team needs that guy. Yep. Right. And it doesn't matter where they are in development. Doesn't matter who they have. It doesn't matter. Every team needs a few of these guys. You definitely need at least one. And that's what you're hoping for here. And so I didn't see anything to really dissuade me here, but I didn't see anything to just like sort of pop off the page either.
Oh, by the way, yes, I will be quietly comparing him to Olivier Maximus Prosper throughout the journey of his career.
7.0. I know. Well, it's funny because his first game, 17 minutes, 7 points, 0 rebound, 0 anything else. Again, who cares? It's the first 17 minutes of summer league. But I'm right with you, because I know this is the guy that we talked about. So we'll probably always sort of do this in the back of our own heads, and fans out there are going to do that with the guy they had there. Right. Yep. Like whether it was Dariq or Clowney or whoever you had. I was looking at Podziemski the other day. I know he went before. I was like, he had 11 rebounds in his first summer league game. And I was like, I knew it. I knew he could rebound at the NBA level. Anyway,
one summer league game. I was right the whole time. We'll
do this all. We'll do it all season. Here.
Coming up here in a second, we're going to talk about some other big performances from Kennedy Chandler, from Armoni Brooks, and then also dive into a couple of names that are familiar to Nets fans in Raiquan Gray and David Duke Jr. What did they show in these first two games, and how does it impact them going forward with the Nets? Okay, so as always is the case with Summer League, somebody jumps off the page. Someone surprises people. And coming into this, a guy like Kennedy Chandler, this isn't necessarily surprising because he had been drafted by the Spurs, traded to the Memphis Grizzlies, then him being straight out released by the Grizzlies. That was the surprising part because they actually owed him a decent chunk of change. So the Nets pick him up, they bring him in. I'm going to point out something about him. Just specifically, I'll use this last game as the example against the Knicks. He had seven assists in that game. And I'm going to make a comparison to a player that has long been on the minds of the Brooklyn Nets, and that's Cam Thomas. And we always talk about how in the summer league, it's not about the full fundamentals of an NBA basketball game. And, what can you really expect Cam Thomas to show you? Well, guess what? Kennedy Chandler came in and made an active decision to show you that he can try to be this all-around player. We'll talk about whether or not there's any path here with the Nets or not, but you have to at least see him, along with Armoni Brooks, by the way, and just go, yeah, these guys are going to be NBA level players to whatever extent they get to. Like they were showcasing, I think, an all-around game and certainly facets for Armoni Brooks that NBA teams can like and can see functioning.
Yeah, Chandler was a guy we were kind of a little excited about coming into Summer League. Talked about him with Jacques Manuel from Brooklyn Buzz a little bit. Thought there was a guy that he could pop in Summer League because these guys do usually have paths to do it. Like if you're going to be the on-ball creator, you're just going to have it more. And Summer League can kind of lend itself to, again, a little bit more up and down the court action, a little more transition stuff. And if you have speed and hops like Chandler does, there was going to be chances for him to really show. I'm hesitant to get too excited about it here for a couple reasons. One, the size is always going to be a really uphill struggle for him. He's just a smaller guy. He's for sure athletic. And he for sure has, up out of the gym hops, right? We saw him throw down a couple times in this game where he can really leap. The shooting is not good, and that's always going to be really hard. And I do wonder, while I do believe the Summer League, he showed you, I think, just about everything in the Summer League here except for the shooting. But the problem is when the shooting's not there, you start wondering what you have, right? Yep. Because I don't know, the Nets have had think about other guys the Nets had, like Chris Chioza, Mike James. I'm not necessarily comparing those guys to him. He's more athletic than both those guys. But again, undersized point guards who weren't massive threats from deep. It's hard, right? It's hard because the one level up from this, you have to be so elite at the other stuff that I worry that it's easier to look great in Summer League on this, and it's a little harder to go. Now, that being said, I'm hoping he lands in Long Island because it's a kind of guy that you like to innings eat during the season and to maybe develop a little bit more. He's a guy that has he has potential, but I think the flaws in the game, right? I mean, you see it, the flaws. Yeah. I just don't want to overlook that part because if you're a on-ball point guard and you can't shoot threes, it's going to be tough.
Well, and the funny thing about it is too, and that's why I even said it. I think that he has a future. I don't know if it works with the Brooklyn Nets. Other teams, certain teams can take a flyer on a guy like this and he can find a path forward. You talk about the weaknesses, especially even beyond the shooting, which is obviously the number one, but even some of the plays, especially in Summer League, we talk about this a lot. Hey, listen, you blow by a lot of guys, you get at the rim. He does have incredible jumps for a guy that's 6 foot listed as. I'd be shocked if that was the accurate measurement. But you also saw him get swallowed up inside a bunch of times. And if you think about the NBA level, where the guy's playing on the interior and defensively and switching, that becomes even that much harder there as well. So I think there's obviously flaws there. But to your point, if he ended up in Long Island, I think that's great for the Brooklyn Nets, the other players that they want to develop, because you have a guy that can do all these other things. So results oriented to the side, he can set the table, facilitate, right? Work in transition, and hopefully give other guys good opportunities to continue to develop. Armoni Brooks, quickly, the other veteran player. This is a guy it's weird. He goes 5 of 10 from deep in the second game against the Knicks. And you go, well, this guy has an NBA level shot. He played 74 games in his career, the bulk of those with Houston and then a little bit with Toronto. But at the NBA level, has never shot his first season with Houston, shot 38% from deep. After that, never cleared 30%. So he's a guy that looks like he's better than G League. This is Summer League quality, but I don't know where he fits in, and specifically with the Brooklyn Nets. If you're not going to have the outside shot, hard for me to paint a path for you going forward, right?
I know we're just to like not skip around here, but I would actually lump Armoni Brooks and David Duke Jr. together here, and it's something that you just said, which you just said it, and you just defined it, which was better than G League, not good enough for the NBA, right? Like that's where both these guys are. It's like they're going to ball out in the G League. David Duke Jr. did it last year, right? Was just an absolute bucket in the G League, and looks great. And has looked great in multiple summer leagues, right? And Armoni Brooks, as we saw today, even though, the Isaiah Thomas couldn't remember his name, even though he watched him the whole game, and announced the whole game.
The first 46 minutes, I just could not knock down into this guy's name. I know the guy next to me was saying his name over and over again, but honestly,
just an all-time performance from Zeke. But okay, so this is what we see a lot, right?
I know your name. I know your name. I know you're the co-host with me. I know.
This is what we see this a lot, right? It's these like tweeners. It's these guards that are really athletic, that can do some things really well, but at some point there's just something that's just not all the way there. Now, that's the reason I'm sort of putting them together, is because Brooks, was an absolute flamethrower in this game. David Duke Jr. came on so strong in the second half, and we've seen it. But we also have seen what happens at the NBA level when there's multiple minutes, and it's like, oh, it's just not there. Like getting to the basket is just that much harder. Right? Getting a wide open look from deep is just that much harder when you can't create it for yourself. When all those things get 15 to 20 to 25% harder, it's these guys where it doesn't get all the way there. Sometimes it's their size. Like if David Duke Jr. is 6'6" instead of 6'4" or whatever, then maybe we're having a different conversation. It's like goes back to the Clowney thing. It's like at some point though, it's just a little too tough. So I hate to lump them together because. And I'm not even taking digs at them. These guys play great. They play great. This is super hard. 500 guys or 400 and something guys get to play at the NBA level at any given time. It's really hard, man. And if you're just not all the way there, it can be hard. And that's why you're going to look great in the G League, and it might be harder at the NBA level.
And, in David Duke Jr.'s case, and in both these players, but 25% harder at the NBA makes the results 50% worse, right? Like it's not a 1-to-1 about what the impact is. And in David Duke Jr.'s case, obviously, I think his biggest problem is the on the ball isn't good enough and the off ball shooting isn't good enough, right? Like it's the one or the other. One of these things has to be good enough to translate. Last note before we get out here, the Brooklyn Nets gave Jalen Wilson, as we said at the top, the 2-way contract. The other 2-way contract right now is Raiquan Gray, which I find a little bit surprising, especially when you watch the summer league results on him. He continues to be a guy. He's built. The comparison is just based on how he's built, nothing else about it. But he's built like Zion Williamson, right? Like he's this stocky 265-pound frame, and everything that you watch with him though is like a little bit hesitant. And then when he does commit, it's a little overcommitted, right? We saw the flash in the one game last year, knocks down all those threes. I understand, I think, fundamentally why the Nets have given him the 2-way contract, because, again, he, in theory, represents something that the NBA roster could use right now. I have yet to be convinced that he can translate those things forward, and that means the Nets still do have another 2-way contract remaining. Do any of those last 4 guys that we've discussed, do you earmark any of them to have a chance to pick up that third one?
I personally would give it to Chandler if he's eligible for that one, which I think he is. And so just because I think he represents the most upside, that's where I would go with it. The Gray would think I'm with you. I don't really understand it. I just don't know what has been shown here that makes you think that this is going to be the guy you want on the 2-way. He's not even starting in summer league.
I know. That was a mind blowing thing too. It's not like if you give him the 2-way, then start him and give him the big role. And you know what I mean? So he's a little bit of a head scratcher for me. Again, on paper, his skill set, he is a good passer. He shows good court vision, but it just never gets put together for a consistent chunk of time where you can rationalize that. And I think my last note is that all of this being said, you're still waiting on Derek Whitehead, obviously. Clowney is a ways away. Right now, Jalen Wilson. That is the guy out of Summer League that represents real value potentially for the Brooklyn Nets roster. We're still waiting. I think to your point about Chandler, makes sense to have him because then you're controlling him and you can always use him in something else, right? Because other teams may be interested in a player like that. Beyond that, right now, I think we have real question marks about how the Nets are going to bring up some young talent during the season and continue to develop them at the NBA level.
Yeah, we'll be back later in the week talking about. I think there's 2 more summer league games left, right? So we'll kind of break it down. I suspect we see the same starting lineup for the next game, and then maybe they switch it up for the last one. I think that's typically how it goes. We're also tomorrow going to cover some of the stuff that's been coming out around Detroit with some of the Damian Lillard stuff. So we'll see where the Nets fit in there. Go ahead.
Later in the week, little in-season tournament conversation. I think we got to get in on that, buddy. They broke down the 3 brackets of the Eastern Conference.
We could also spend like an entire week talking about whether you, the average person, could score a single point at the NBA level.
Yeah. We should have a fun one.
Spent a better part of my life getting into that one. So it's a lot of stuff to talk about here later in the week. Make sure you're following Locked On Nets wherever you subscribe to podcasts and wherever you subscribe. Or excuse me, there's only one place, and to subscribe over on YouTube. So make sure it's totally free for you. It really just helps us. It's the number one way to help us. Just subscribe where you listen to podcasts. Subscribe over on YouTube. It's all you got to do, and you'll have Locked On Nets with you every day.
I am in the habit of looking not so much to the nature of the gift as to the spirit in which it is given. That's Robert Louis Stevenson, by care of Wilson from Home Improvement.
One of the all-time great poets. We'll be back again tomorrow talking more Brooklyn Nets basketball.
Basketball.